Welcome to the War Watch podcast, a 6-episode series from the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights, a joint centre of the University of Geneva and the Geneva Graduate Institute.
Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the War Watch podcast. Over 6 episodes, we examine conflicts that demand our attention, bringing you expert documentation, legal analysis, and concrete actions you can take. War Watch is the Geneva Academy's interactive new online portal. You can explore conflicts and track international humanitarian law violations in these conflicts. I'm Juliette Graf, and joining me throughout this series, as always, is Stuart Casey-Maslen, Special Advisor to the IHL in Focus project. Stuart will help us unpack the law and its limits in every episode, alongside guests who bring perspectives from the field. Today, for episode 3, we focus on Syria. A year ago, in December 2024, a lightning Islamist offensive ended 5 decades of brutal rule by the Assad family. Syrians celebrated. Last Monday, the new authorities marked the occasion with military parades in Damascus. Internationally, Syria's new leader, Mohammad Al Abdallah, moved at breakneck speed to break diplomatic isolation. But now, 1 year later, Assad is gone, but violations continue and accountability remains absent. Our guest today is Mohammad Al Abdallah, the Executive Director of the Syria Justice and Accountability Center, which we will refer to as SJAC, which has been documenting violations and preserving evidence throughout Syria's conflict. This is War Watch. Let's begin. Mohammed, most people celebrated when Assad fell in December 2024. But here we are recording this in December 2025, 1 year later, and throughout this past year, your organization, SJAC, has been documenting serious violations. Could you tell us what specific violations you have been documenting right now in Syria?
Hello, this is Mohammed. Thank you for having me. First to say, everybody is pleased to get rid of the brutal government of Bashar al-Assad. However, getting rid of the bad government is not enough alone. There are cases of disappearance, clearly not at the same massive scale what the Assad regime was doing. We noticed cases of summary executions happening in the broad daylight in the street. We documented 2 intense, massive campaigns of violence. One attacked the coastal area in March of 2025. This is the area where the Alawi minority lived, where Bashar al-Assad came from that area. And the second was in mid-July, where the Druze community, another minority in the south, were attacked as well by a coalition of government forces, allied militias, and also volunteers who did contribute to the violations. So throughout the documentation, we spotted simply campaigns of door-to-door executions, burning properties, looting, several cases of sexual violence, including sexual abuse of women and then executing them later, executing civilians based on their religion after they're being checked and asked, what's your sect or religion sect, and then bullet in the head. And unfortunately, and maybe fortunate for us, that the bad guys, the perpetrators, recorded themselves. They aired these videos. They're so proud of what they've done, and we managed to download all these cases. We've noticed in Suwaida, for example, there's a very famous case where military personnel enter a family home at the 4th floor, and they force 3 young men to jump from the balcony, and they execute them as they decline to jump off the rail of the balcony. So these intense campaigns of violence brought bad memories to all Syrians that this is what Bashar al-Assad militias used to do with us, and that without accountability, we're not actually reaching a serious end of violence. The culture of impunity is there.
And can you give us a sense of who's carrying out these violations? Are we talking about the new government forces or other armed groups?
Indeed, this is a coalition of kind of a mixed kind of group of attackers. In the coastal violence, there were a call of mobilization by the Ministry of Defense, belonged to the new government. And then under that umbrella of Ministry of Defense, we get a lot of militias contributed. So the Ministry of Defense called for a mobilization And you get groups and groups of militias attacking also civilians who were fueled by the previous regime's violence, and they want to take revenge. And they ended up contributing to the violations. Same with Suwaida. We got the government deploying forces, which is a lot of militias and a lot of allied groups. But then a couple of days after the government forces were threatened by the Israeli airstrike and were forced to evict the area, a lot of tribal forces and volunteering tribal members showed up to continue the violations for the next 2 days, kind of under the behest of the government to continue that attack. Now, we're faced as documentation organizations, we're faced with the question, who's liable? Because kind of mixing the actors under that big umbrella, when the UN Commission of Inquiry published their investigation on the coastal violence, the government did also publish their own investigation. And the idea was, it wasn't us, it was the volunteers. It wasn't us, the government, it was the militias. And that kind of blurring the line, who's liable, who's the perpetrator here. We know a lot of people contributed from the government side to the hostilities, but also the government can try to escape the liability using that strategy, it seems.
And we often hear that accountability for past crimes is being blocked. What exactly do we mean by that? What is being blocked?
The government in Damascus issued 2 decrees to establish the Transitional Justice Commission and the Missing Persons Commission. Both commissions started to operate slowly after a couple of months of their establishment. However, we have concerns about the genuinity of the government efforts to hold perpetrators accountable. We see a lot of those former perpetrators given a pass. They're not being prosecuted. Some of them actually brought back to be part of the new kind of structure of the government. So this is one question, that the government is not being transparent. They issued an amnesty that's not amnesty, in the sense they opened the door of prison and let a lot of the personnel of the former regime's military out, and they said they don't have blood in their hands, which is usually what a court of law will decide, if anybody guilty or not guilty. But without a trial, they were given an amnesty without actually an amnesty decree or law. So this behavior from the government is keeping us up at night, to be honest. We're worried what's going to happen. The second item is the Syrian intelligence archive of the former government, which has a massive amount of documentation, very scrupulous writing and details of everything happened. We managed to extract almost 1 million pages of that document, of those documents, only in December and January, December 2024 and January 25, just to scan them and return them to the Ministry of Justice later, just to rescue that archive. We collected that from a lot of journalists, a lot of people who looted these buildings, and we collected some from the buildings ourselves. Up till to date, the authorities are not utilizing that archive. Although it says everything, it names the perpetrators, it names the victims, it tells about their dates of execution, the location of burials. The data is there.
So we will go back to those 1.1 million pages of archives that are being blocked and the implications of that.
Not only 1 million pages, to correct, the government has tens of millions of documents in their buildings. We extracted 1 million page by ourselves, and we have a 500,000 pages we extracted between 2013 and 2016. So as an NGO, small NGO, we sit on 1.5 million pages of the intelligence archive. The buildings there are the sheer volume of pages there, absolutely amazing trove of documents for prosecution and for search for missing persons that's not being tapped into.
So before you walk us through why they're essential and what all of these archives could actually tell us, I'll quickly turn to Stuart. Stuart, Mohammed has laid out 2 problems here. We have ongoing violations and blocked accountability. What does international humanitarian law actually require Syria to do right now?
There are a number of things that they are required to do. Some pertain to what happened in the past, whether it was by HTS, that's to say the new government themselves, or by the former regime of Bashar al-Assad. There is a duty to investigate all of those potential violations and to hold individual perpetrators to account. And that means criminally, that means prosecuting war crimes that have been committed. But then there's also ongoing obligations, whether a particular abuse is linked or not to an armed conflict. International human rights law requires that the perpetrators be brought to account. in particular, when an act is linked to an armed conflict, and that involves some of the acts that Mohammed was talking about, for example, against the Druze, there is a duty to prosecute all war crimes committed by nationals and committed on a state's territory. So there are a number of areas where the government needs to undertake a proper investigation and then prosecute. And very importantly, it must not be selective prosecutions, by which I mean it's not just what the others have done, it's also what your own forces, your own supporters have done. And there, I think we'll talk about a little later, some very serious problems in the Syrian context.
And just to be clear, these obligations apply to Syria's new current government, even though they didn't necessarily commit the crimes under Assad.
That's absolutely right. Under international humanitarian law, under international law more generally, the government that is in power is responsible not just for what it does or does not do, but also for what previous governments, previous administrations have done. That is very clear. Otherwise, there would be very little accountability. You just come to power, wash your hands of the past, and move on. We've seen what happens when states do that. We've seen it in Iraq. We've seen it in Libya. That leads us down a very dark path. And international law is clear. You are responsible not only for your own acts, but also for the atrocities committed by others.
So the law is clear about what must Syria do. But Mohammed, it's obviously not happening. Can we go into a bit more detail into why you think Syria's current government is blocking this accountability?
So I don't think the government is completely blocking the justice process here. I think they're being selective. They want to definitely hold accountable several members from the former regime, but not everybody. I think I'm questioning the credibility of the process and the genuinity of it. They're not blocking it in the sense there's no trials happening at all. No, some might happen, but they're selective. So the decree to establish the National Commission for Transitional Justice is one-sided in the sense that it's focused on the crimes committed by the regime of Bashar al-Assad. That by default excluded everybody else. HTS, the current government, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that excluded ISIS, that excluded Turkey, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, third parties, anybody contributed to the violence. The Syrian National Army, which is a militia backed by Turkey in the north, Syrian Democratic Forces, everybody is excluded from the accountability except the former government, which is bad to start with. The second part is the government is blocking the evidence, as we mentioned, the current government. They're not sharing the archive. They're not making the archive accessible to the commissions. There are certain former perpetrators are part of the new government. Some of them in the militia leadership of Bashar al-Assad militias. Some of them were in the military, like General Talal Makhlouf. He's Assad's cousin, general. He chaired or headed the Republican Guards, likely participated in the chemical attack near Damascus, and now he's at his home, so not being prosecuted for no clear reason. The amnesty, non-amnesty, the government issue that we mentioned, there's no transparency there. We don't know what's happening. So I think they're gearing towards selective justice. They're kind of capturing more stars or superstars in the intelligence and some big names to put them on trial just to make a symbolic flavor that we made some justice efforts. There are several businessmen and elite from the corrupt inner circle of Bashar al-Assad who financed the war, who financed militias, who looted the country, are now being brought back to be part of the business elites in Damascus. So in general, when building cases, the archives we extracted from the military police and from the military tribunal, it shows explicitly who was detained there and who was executed there and what date and who is the officer who signed on it and where the remains were transferred. I think analyzing this archive is going to be a cornerstone for the success of both commissions, the Transitional Justice Commission and the Missing Persons Commission. It's a wasted effort that to go and investigate outside of these documents and not utilize them. And there is also, it's a big question bugging everybody, like why the government is blocking these documents. Are they trying to shield certain members of the former government? Are they trying to shield themselves?
And Mohammed, you have a personal experience with detention. Could you tell us a bit more about that and how it shaped the way you think about what justice means for victims and their families?
Yeah, indeed. I was detained twice in 2005, 2006. I'm a survivor of torture, but after I was referred to Sadnaya prison, I met my father there, who was a writer and who was spending also a prison term, and he was missing at the time. Sadnaya wasn't a place for humans, to be honest. Even before the conflict started in 2011 with the uprising, and it became more brutal, a place for executions. But that shaped my experience in the sense that this needs to end, regardless who's in government. Torture is not a thing we need to live in and live with in Syria. There's a practice of torture and a culture of torture. And that culture, unfortunately, did not end with Bashar al-Assad out of the government, and his cabinet and intelligence are gone. That's why we've seen more torture happening under the new government as well. We've seen executions, and there's a culture of violence and a culture of impunity that's not being broken by changing the authorities, because it became so embedded part of the system. And also it speaks to the capacity of the state and investigations. You don't know how to conduct a proper investigation. So the only thing you're capable of is putting somebody and beat them to confess to things they did not actually do. So you just have them sign the document and transfer them to court. So I don't think X or Z officers are responsible for torture. Torture is an apparatus, and it still exists in Syria.
Thank you for sharing that, Mohammed. If I can just go back on those cases you mentioned, those current cases of torture that you have been documenting, that would come as a surprise to some listeners. Can you tell us a bit more about that, about also the ongoing executions?
Sure. So on the executions, we have, given that the transitional justice efforts are slow, in my opinion, that's one of the contributors. A lot of people are seeing those former officials and former intelligence and military officials who abused them, who detained their loved ones, who disappeared their loved ones. They see them enjoy their life, simply, no accountability. So that's triggering a lot of people to take their rights back by their hands. And unfortunately, the shape of that is execution, sometimes in broad daylight. Just pull a gun, shoot somebody in the head in the middle of the street. It's happening on the hands of a lot of civilians and former victims, turning to become the new perpetrators now. I think because the government is failing in the accountability process, or that's at least a major factor. The cases of torture is in two tracks. There's torture in detention happening now, and that's documented through some of those who were released and spoke to us about what they've seen during their detention, and sometimes by lawyers who represent them. In the last couple of months, there were a couple of public cases of people die under torture within hours of being in detention. There's a very famous case, a gentleman, Yusuf Labad, returned from Germany after 13 years, and he was detained by the government general security forces. They didn't sustain a full day. Less than a couple of hours, he was dead body. They did an autopsy report and medical report, and that more or less resembled what Bashar al-Assad intelligence was doing. They wrote something related to his medical records and heart failure, and he wasn't overdosed on drugs, without writing why he has a 12 centimeters cut in the back of his skull, basically because he was beaten by the back of a rifle. He was being hit in the back of his head. There's a torture happened during the coastal violence and the Suwaida violence, the two big campaigns of violence we spoke about. And that took the shape of torturing people in public, abusing them, forcing them to bark like dogs and to make animals noises and walk on the floor, basically in legs and arms, just to imitate animals, and then execute them after the torture session. Those are well documented and nobody can dispute those.
And Stuart, from an international law perspective, could you comment a little bit more on this approach? Clearly, they've created a transitional justice commission, but that isn't enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously welcome that a commission was established, but the commission has to be empowered and it has to be serious in pursuing all those that are or have committed violations. If they're linked to an armed conflict, the kind of abuses that Mohammed has talked about, are war crimes. If they're not, they're still crimes under domestic law, murder, assault, sexual violence, and so on. And they must be prosecuted following an impartial investigation. We've seen the road that lies ahead if you do not fulfill your obligations under international and domestic law to pursue those who are or have perpetrated these kind of violations. And it is a very dark road indeed. So this kind of behavior, this kind of conduct, this kind of abuse needs to be investigated. The kind of work that Mohammad is doing is exceptionally important, providing, identifying the forensic evidence, but it needs political will. And this is where I think other states need to step up to the plate and make it clear that they want to support the new administration, but they want to support an administration that is dedicated to justice, to reparation, to truth, not one that is dedicated to partial solutions or approaches. It has to be justice for everyone, otherwise it's justice for no one.
And Mohammed has been stressing the importance of releasing these archives. Under international humanitarian law, is access to them legally required, or is that optional?
So where there is evidence, that has to be made available. It has to be made available to prosecutors. It has to be made available to law enforcement officials. It doesn't necessarily have to be made public. Indeed, there are good reasons for some of the more gruesome details to be kept away from the public, but that does not mean that that information is buried or hidden. It means that it gets into the hands of those who will investigate and prosecute them. And we've talked about the mistakes that have been made. I think we can also recognize the challenges. The new government does not control all of its territory. Israel occupies some of it. Turkey occupies some of it. There are a range of armed groups that continue to operate, including Islamic State, which has been defeated but is not dead. All of that makes the task of the new government very difficult, but it reinforces the importance of them reaching out to others who want to support them, who want to help them to do the job properly. And that requires political will. And there are some difficult decisions that have to be taken. But if you don't take them, this will come back and cause huge problems in the future.
Mohammed, when we last spoke, you were talking about this window. You were explaining how timing right now was critical. Can you explain that notion to our listeners, and why now? What needs to happen now, and what will happen if we miss this moment?
Indeed, I think we have an excellent opportunity for accountability. I think this could put the country on a path of rule of law, respect the human rights, and basically end the culture of impunity in the country. Without doing a proper accountability process, we are seeing the evidence are very clear and overwhelming that taking rights by your own hand is happening in the shape of executions. We are getting a lot of officials left Syria already, and some are trying to leave. So we might miss out on the opportunity of capturing them. If the archives remain blocked from prosecutors and from human rights groups or from the Transitional Justice Commission, this is not going to help at all. I think the window is closing also on the civil society because the civic space is shrinking. A lot of people are scared of expressing their opinion, but also the civil society might simply give up on some of the effort they're doing and leaving it to the state where the justice is selective. This is bothering me personally. As a survivor of torture, I don't accept this. I don't want to see it in my country. And without proper accountability mechanism, the right to truth is not going to be accomplished to the people. I want to know what happened. I want to know how people disappeared. I want to know where they were buried, regardless if you're handing me a remain of a loved one 5 years down the line or no. Without knowing what happened, a lot of families, they don't have proper closure.
So we have this closing window, and as Stuart mentioned, states with leverage who aren't using it. Mohammed, if we get concrete, what actually needs to happen now?
We need, indeed, if there's a transitional justice law being drafted, it needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be brave, in the sense taking brave decisions that you might actually put some of your own people on trial for wrongdoing, but you're ceding the ground for the rule of law and for respecting human rights. We need capacity building to the justice sector in Syria, and this is something a lot of member states can contribute to and support the new authorities in Syria and the new state. If the only mean and method of putting up a case is torture, yes, if you don't have the capacity to do forensic investigation or do digital open source investigation and compare images and data, and if you don't have the tools and means to do, I don't know, DNA analysis or all the resources needed to do proper investigations, even without forensic, on the criminal investigation side, torture will be the mean established to use to extract confessions and execution and data to be used on these trials. Of course, the trials are going to be problematic. They're not going to respect due process or fair trial requirements. And then we're back in the cycle of there's no rule of law. And even again, I'm stressing this 10 times, even if there's no comparison in the scale of violence happening today, just accepting this behavior to be part of the new Syria is just a failure to the process, in my opinion. I think the international community had leverage to pressure for allowing the UN mechanisms to enter. There are 2 UN institutions that could help in this, the International Independent Impartial Mechanism to assist in the prosecution. They could help a lot in the case building and techniques and evidence sharing and gathering. And there's the UN institution for missing persons who could help strategize and support the National Commission of Missing Persons to establish this work.
And when you're talking about this new Syria and you're talking about these demands, you're not talking about abstractions. Who are you thinking about when you say this? If we miss this opportunity, who is paying the price?
Who will pay the price? The entire country, to be honest. The families of the missing persons who will not get proper closure, the families and the victims of abuses from the previous government who did not who were not held accountable for their violations. I think we're risking not putting the country on the path of rule of law and the culture of accountability. I think we're emboldening impunity when we bring former officials from the former regime who committed violations, who had a really bad reputation, to put them in certain areas in the new cabinet and the new government, not necessarily ministers, but in certain areas of the new structure. When the Suwaida violence happened in the south against the Druze, the government was embarrassed so much with the videos of their own fighters executing and torturing. So they decided to establish a commission of inquiry from the state, which is amazing. Good, do it. They appointed people. One of the people who was appointed to that commission is the officer who detained me in 2005. Why this guy is being recycled to become an investigator and a commission of inquiry from the state about a human rights violation? This guy abused me. So when we're seeing all these things, and I think we're risking just swapping authorities, one authority to another, but not having proper transition in Syria. And that's the danger.
So Stuart, Mohammad has just laid out very clearly what needs to happen. Could you let us know what tools actually exist right now that could make this possible?
Well, there's a lot of things that could happen. I mean, Syria could join the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, for example, that could do the job if the domestic criminal justice system doesn't want to do it. They could help that. We've seen in other countries what we call hybrid courts. That's bringing in both domestic national judges and international experts, international judges, to make a tribunal that respects the rights of fair trial, but also delivers justice. We've got commissions of inquiry that are regularly set up into different countries. If they're given access, if they're given resources, they can help to identify the truth and then identify those who are perpetrators. And over the long term, we need to see a Syrian criminal justice system that functions on its own and that functions impartially and effectively. But we need a political commitment in order to do that. That's the challenge at the moment. It's the challenge that Mohammad is trying to address. But he and others like him need international help. We've seen some trials in Switzerland, in Germany, but that can only be the tip of the iceberg. What we need is a functioning national criminal justice system. And the work of creating that system needs to start now.
Mohammad, I like to end each of our episodes with a forward-looking question to our guest. If we are sitting here in 5 years and Syria has actually delivered justice, not just for some, as we looked, but comprehensively, what would that look like? What would have happened?
I want to see in 5 years clear cases, criminal charges brought against former regime officials. I want to have a real trial where there's due process and fair trial guarantees, but also where the trial is actually a source of information to the families and to the victims. We understand what happened through the evidence, through the investigations, through the statements of those accused. I want to see closure to the families in the sense of they're part of the search for their missings. And it's not about handing off a remain again. It's about telling me how this happened and how we reached the mass grave, how this person was disappeared and executed. And I want to see a country run by rule of law where you could actually prosecute people officials for wrongdoings because they torture somebody and because somebody died in custody. Unfortunately, torture and disappearance are really bad, and they're deeply rooted from the 70s and the 80s in the Syrian culture and the Syrian history, and we should cut with them. I want to see this ending in my country.
This has been episode 3 of the War Watch podcast, a 6-episode series exploring armed conflicts and the laws that seek to limit their impact. New episodes drop the first Monday of every month. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss the next one. All the reports, resources, and actions we mentioned today are in the show notes. And you can explore Syria and a number of other conflicts on the War Watch portal at www.warwatch.ch. I also highly recommend consulting Mohammad's organization, the Syria Justice and Accountability Center, and all the incredible work they are currently doing. I'm Juliette Graf. With me today was Stuart Casey-Maslen, Special Advisor to the IHL in Focus project. And our guest today was Mohammad Al Abdallah from the Syria Justice and Accountability Center. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to War Watch, a podcast from the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights, a joint centre of the University of Geneva and the Geneva Graduate Institute. Find us at geneva-academy.ch and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.